You know, if there's one question I get asked more than any other, more even than do hummingbirds hum simply because they don't know the words, that question would have to be, Mark, what is the single most important ingredient for photography? Well, today we're going to try and answer that question. Look, I won't keep you in suspense, and you've probably already seen the title of this video already. Suffice it to say, let there be light. Yes, light, that most intangible but critical aspect to an image. And what is light? Well, we can go with the electromagnetic radiation with wavelengths between 380 and 750 nanometers, which is visible to the human eye definition, or we could get a little bit more poetic. After all, light can be glancing, gleaming, glimmering, glinting, glistening, glittering and glossy, and they're just the G words. It's something that preoccupies my thoughts, even more than the Roman Empire, particularly at this time of the year. I tune into my favourite UK YouTubers struggling with wintry conditions and bemoaning the lack of light. Well, while the Northern Hemisphere is plunged into the dark, my particular part of the world has been locked in a grueling summer. I watch all of you trudge through sludge like characters from a World War I poem with your film pushed to ISO 800, while we happily frolic in the low-grain end of the ISO numeration system. In fact, in Western Australia, we even break the sunny 16 rule. If you're out in the summer sun, you can expect to be shooting at f22. And so the question is, how can I make the best of this? Well, this was a situation I found myself in recently. My original plan was to do an exhaustive review of this particular camera, the Nikon L35 AD. But it was looking to be a 40-degree day, which isn't so conducive to empirical testing. Moreover, I just wanted to make the best of the cooler morning and the early light before the midday hellfire apocalypse took hold, and I took the dog for a walk around the small fishing village of Leeman, nearly 3 hours north of Perth. First things first, I love this camera. The Nikon L35 AD is a date-back version of the venerable Nikon L35 AF that really does deserve a review of its own, certainly a more detailed look. For today, we're just going to treat it as a tool for capturing that most precious commodity, light. And how did it fare? Well, you tell me. In all fairness, what you're seeing probably isn't an accurate representation of the day because, of course, I was shooting film and that colors the experience, literally. In the case of Kodak Ultramax, what you've got is a good medium contrast film that should suit most conditions. But what is that, I hear you say? Why are the images so contrasty and grainy? Well, some of that grain will be down to the 400 ISO film speed, but the real culprit here is the fact that I may have underdeveloped the film a little. In fact, I know I underdeveloped the film a little. I was developing at 39 degrees, but kept it out of the water bath, so it probably dropped a degree or so over the 4-minute development time. Lesson learnt from my laziness. Yes, Cinestill, I should have read the instructions. And if you look at the negatives, you can see how thin they look. Even the labeling above the sprocket holes is just a bit dim. So I'm not blaming the camera. In fact, it's actually a good argument to hold off on that Nikon L35 review because I know it can do better. I'm blaming me, the one factor that I could actually control. Which brings us back to the topic of light. Look, for many photographers, light isn't even an issue. The first thing that they'll do in a studio is remove all of the ambient light so that they can bring in their own equipment and dial in exactly the right settings to get the results they want. But the real world doesn't usually give you that level of flexibility. Despite my frequent protestations to the opposite, I am not God. And that great fusion reactor in the sky doesn't have adjustable power or a Bowens mount. Sure, I could use scrims, reflectors, diffusers, or add my own light, but somehow that doesn't seem to capture the spirit of a morning dog walk. So, let's keep things natural and try to unpack this phenomenon a little. Shine a little light into the topic, so to speak. Because this stuff is complex. Think about direction for a start. The first thing I learned as an 8-year-old aspiring professional photographer is to shoot with the light behind you. And that makes a lot of sense. You get bright, evenly lit scenes that could even be captured by my Kodak 110 camera. Of course, as I matured, I started to realize things aren't that simple, and I wondered why all of my portraits had people squinting angrily into the camera while being blasted with sunlight. So not always the most flattering. Also, while it gives you light, it doesn't shape light, and that was something hard to wrap my 8-year-old brain around. But you do often end up with images that are just flat and lack a sense of depth or drama. Now, that's not always a bad thing, of course. If you change position and shoot with the light to the side, it instantly also adds dimension to the image. It separates the elements from each other, and depending on how the light falls, it can feather around curves, enhancing the geometry. Light from the back, and well, let's be honest, it's not always pretty, but that can be dependent on a range of factors. Shoot with an old uncoated lens directly into the light and it washes out all the contrast and detail and introduces flaring. Now, as much as I like this Nikon, you'll notice that I did deliberately try to tax it a bit by shooting into the sun. For the most part, it held up well, but you can still see the telltale blue blobs of lens flare. Lens hoods can help, as can making sure that the light isn't falling directly on the lens. And of course, it's not a problem in a lot of modern lenses with all that super spectral sub-wavelength nanocrystal coating voodoo gumph. And it can be a look you're going for. Direction isn't just a two-dimensional construct either. I nearly didn't include it in my theoretical framework, and you'll find out soon why, but I suspect if you're here, you've probably heard of the term golden hour, and about how the sun being lower in the sky produces warmer and more flattering light. True, obviously, but there's more going on, because it's not just about direction, it's also about intensity. Our Australian sunshine is a blistering cancer-causing inferno that just streaks through the hole in the ozone layer and raises the already scorched earth like a Roland Emmerich alien invasion movie. The fact is, much of the time you're dealing with a cruel and uncompromising light source in the sun. But dial it down a bit and it becomes much more manageable. The simplest light modifier, of course, is cloud, and my memories of growing up in the UK are of dismal winters and equally dismal summers. I actually grew up near New Brighton, where Martin Parr famously shot his Last Resort series. Of course, he had to use flash to make it look like summer. I returned there in the winter of 2019 and it was a much more dull environment. The only way to bring any real life to the scene was shooting in black and white. So I've created my own intensity scale, going from Arizona at the top to winter in Svalbard at the bottom. Sadly, Perth is only the 11th most sunny city in the world, with 3,200 hours of sunshine every year. But the skies do go on forever, and not always even with those Orb/Ricky Lee Jones little fluffy clouds. Just think of this like the Bristol stool scale, only in this case we're swapping out turds for light. Let's put New Brighton just one stop above the black. Filling in the middle, well, maybe put Bora Bora in there for no other reason than I like the sound of the word Bora Bora. You know what I mean though, that kind of bright but hazy tropical intensity. Of course, not everything is that idyllic, and most of the world is filtered by varying levels of haze and pollution, and that can have a huge effect on the intensity of light. If we're going to include those, we should probably add a Wuhan grade to our light intensity scale, since I've got a few of those photos from China in my Lightroom catalogue. That's not to say that this is purely an Asian phenomenon though. My experience of a beautiful sunset in Santa Monica once was directly proportional to the level of smog in the atmosphere. So there you have your 5-point Likert light intensity scale. Let's add one more dimension. We've covered direction, we've covered intensity. How about quality? Now, bear with me because this is a hard one to define. We probably think about the quality of light primarily in terms of intensity, but I think that there's another element going on here. It's about how the light is scattered by the atmosphere. Fact is, you could look at a grey sky and the diffuse light is the kind that can just sap the colour out of a scene, or it can be the kind that seems to bounce around the celestial spheres and renders everything with a glow. I told you it's hard to explain, but compare this example taken in the UK to this example taken in Perth. They're chalk and cheese, and the latter one is probably an example of my favourite kind of light. Unfortunately, in Perth, this kind of light is incredibly rare, but it's a light that has both intensity and diffusion, but I think most importantly, it is about atmosphere. You can probably add those misty woodland photos you outdoorsy North Face wearing tripod carrying contemplative landscape photographers do to this mix as well. But we don't get fog, Gore-Tex or Kendall mint cake in Australia, so it's not a world I'm familiar with. Regardless, we do get those rare moments, so let's put seraphic at the top of this particular scale and maybe secular down at the bottom. And that's something to remember too. Overcast can mean diffuse, but it doesn't always mean dull. And flat light is even, but even on a grey day, the light has direction. One of the things I was taught early on by a professional natural light photographer was to hold my hand up and watch how the light changes and how it falls on it as I move around. The idea is to get people in that brighter zone to give a bit more oomph to natural light portraits. So we have direction, we have intensity, we have quality, whatever that God factor means. But I'm not satisfied yet. I think there's one more dimension we need to explore, and that's continuity. Why continuity? Well, it's to acknowledge that we don't just live under a big softbox and that light is always going to be modified. If not by the atmosphere, which I guess is what I mean by quality, then by the objects in the scene that block it or break it up. Think about it. In the real world, is the light ever really clean? The real world is messy. We talk about the Sunny 16 rule for exposure, and yes, most representations are great with phrases like light overcast, dark overcast, but even those that are brave enough to identify mixed conditions plonk it somewhere in the middle between sunny and cloudy. But what if the detail you need to capture is in the shadows, or it's in the sky? A single rule of thumb is just not going to work. I tell you, these are the things that roam around my fevered mind, particularly when siestaing in 40-degree furnace of the Western Australian summer. As the afternoon started to cool, though, the unfinished roll of Ultramax started to call to me, and I began to wonder if there is a tangible difference between morning and afternoon light, and what other roles light might play in our photographic process. Let's see. Didn't see this morning. Doesn't it remind you of all of that danger tape they used to have? Oh, it is danger tape still. Ooh, reflective. I'm going to use the flash for this too. But let's try a bit of close focusing. Focusing on that. How close does this get? I can't remember. What I'm trying to do is frame quite squarely with the yellow frame in front, throwing the rest out of focus. Now we'll see how well we go. So another walk, a very tired old dog, and now some more findings about light to throw into the mix. Literally because we've talked about direction, intensity, quality, and now continuity. And what do I actually mean by continuity? Well, it's quite simple really. Regardless of all of the other dimensions, the scene itself will actually impact on the quality of light. Now, you'll notice that I deliberately didn't shoot at midday, which means that no matter the position of the light on the horizontal plane, none of these shots suffer from that harsh, shadowless light that you get in the middle of the day. But you know what? You won't even have those shadows without things in the scene to cast them. The look of the light in these golden hour shots isn't just a function of the light itself, where the angle and atmosphere admittedly impact on the color and intensity. It's also about how the light gets broken up and creates geometry and color in the scene. And it's different from quality because it's less about the light itself and more about the scene. So, shiny surfaces reflect light. Objects block light and cast shadows. This creates contrast both in terms of luminosity, because side lighting will always brighten up the surface it hits and sends the rest into shadow, but also color. Typically, the highlights in the scene tend to be warmer than shadows, and shadows are just as much an element of the scene as the objects that cast them. Sometimes they are the scene and often make for the most interesting photos. And shadows aren't always regular. Every object in the world is a potential flag, gobo, or reflector. Blocking the light can create drama or add dynamism to a scene. Dappled light can lead your eye into specific parts of an image. Reflections can throw light and shadow onto another surface or be a photographic subject in and of themselves. So maybe light and composition aren't really all that separate, because after all, there's no photography at all without light, and the way that light falls can enhance or diminish compositional elements. Sorry if this is starting to sound a bit like a second-year post-structuralist media studies assignment, but you get the idea. Light can come from any direction, front, back, side, and above. It can also vary in intensity, it can vary in quality, and it can vary in continuity. And you know what? Forget it. Everywhere you look in photography, you'll find hints, tips, guides, and rules. Don't shoot into the sun. Don't shoot at the middle of the day. Don't stick your finger in a power socket. Okay, that one might actually have some good basis in workplace safety. Well, you know what I say? The rules. Let's be libertarian in our investigation into luminosity. Do what you want, maybe other than actually sticking your finger in a power socket. Take photos at midday. Make the most of those bright, shadowless scenes. Is the light so bright it bleaches the color? Shoot in black and white. So dark that the colors are muddy? Shoot in black and white. Okay, there may be a bit of bias coming through, but there's a reason why street photographers love black and white. And I'm 70% convinced it's not just because they don't understand light. The fact is that the great celestial softbox won't necessarily be playing ball when you come to capture that decisive moment. Don't miss out on those backlight shots just because you're worried about flare. Don't let too much contrast in a scene or dull conditions prevent you from reaching for your camera. Use light, abuse it, bend it to your will, and break those rules, and perhaps that's the one message worth taking away today. Whether you think in terms of direction, intensity, quality, and continuity, or you just stop and think about what is the light doing next time you pick up your camera, I hope this has been helpful, perhaps even a little bit illuminating. Yes, I went there, but please let me know. Do you have preferred conditions to shoot in? How would you describe the light where you are? Please let me know in the comments and enlighten us. Look, we've described light with a whole bunch of G words. How about L words? Lucent, lucid, luminescent, luminous, or lustrous. In any case, I think we can all agree that light is special. Just don't be lucifugus. Let's keep light at the top of our minds and bookmarked in our thesauruses as we're out taking photos. Later.